Okay, so the concept is pretty simple. Right now, the state, we have a $32 billion biennial budget, and all of that is tax revenue collected from the people of the state. And when the state has to put its money someplace, because it used to have a big vault in the treasurer's office, but I don't think that that much money would fit in the vault. So what we have is a bank account, and that bank account is called the state concentration account, and it's held at the Bank of America. So one of our favorite players, yeah, boa, like a boa constrictor, they're strangling us. So the concept is, why should we let Bank of America make money off of our money? Why don't we just create our own institution? We'll keep the money here. We make money off of our money, and then we still control that money so we can leverage it back into our communities to do the great work, as Ellen was describing how we can leverage that money. So can I get it up on the screen? So I just want to give a quick update on where we're at with the bill and some of the principles that we're trying to follow as we're drafting this bill for the upcoming legislative session. I have a task force working on it right now. It's a blue ribbon task force authorized by Speaker Frank Chop from the 43rd District. And Frank is very supportive of this whole concept. And in fact, our whole House Democratic Caucus has been very supportive of it. And I want to acknowledge the fact that Representative Phyllis Kennedy and Representative David Frocht and Representative Luis Moscoso, who are all represented here, are all co-sponsors on the bill that passed we had last session. In fact, that bill has gotten such good traction in the House that every member of the House Democratic Caucus leadership has signed on to the bill. So there's a good shot at it. Our task right now is to come up with something that is viable, that gets our foot in the door and really can gel the legislature, because there is a question on whether or not we may need to pass a constitutional amendment to get it there. So our strategy is to try and avoid that constitutional question, if at all possible, to get our institution up and running and to put some test things out there. I don't want to get presumptuous and get ahead of the task force. I want to respect the work of the task force because it is a blue ribbon task force. These people know what they're talking about. My only requirement in assembling the task force was that they had to be financial experts, financial institution experts, and they had to be open to the concept of a publicly owned bank for the state. So with that as the requirement, we have put together a blue ribbon panel of financial experts. And I don't want to get ahead of that by saying this is what we are going to do. I want to respect their work, respect their integrity, and hopefully we can come up to a bill that will have the consensus of the entire task force, which will make it much easier to get it through the legislature. If we're divided in a proposal next session, it just makes it difficult to get it done. So in respecting the politics of the situation, that's where we're at right now and trying to work through this process. Let me see, this must be the little clicker thingy. So it's been happening for a couple of years right now. We had our first test bill back in 2010, House Bill 3162. We got a hearing in the House Financial Institutions and Insurance Committee, and it was a very good hearing, actually, very positive. So the following year, House Bill 1320 was drafted this past session, and we drafted a Senate bill, 5238. And in late January, early in session, we were able to get hearings in both the House and the Senate committees with jurisdiction, and had very good responses from the public. The public just came out and supported this thing. In the House hearing, well, actually in both hearings, we actually brought out a couple of gentlemen who are retired now from the Bank of North Dakota, but were top-level officers of the bank, and they were available to answer any questions of anybody in the legislature who was interested in this concept. So we really had a very good set of hearings. Unfortunately, we were not able to get the votes to get it out of committee in either the Senate or the House. So a little bit of time went by, but then we had a brainstorm. There was another bill that came through the legislature with an appropriate title. So we merged, see, Washington State, we don't have the same issues like Congress, well, we do, but it's different in the sense that you can't have a bill that acts like a Christmas tree where you can hang anything onto it, right? In the state of Washington, our Constitution mandates a single subject title. So you have to, I mean, depending on how the sponsor writes, you can write the title as broad as you want to, and then it becomes a Christmas tree. But we try to keep things as narrow as possible to prevent that from happening. So, but that being said, a bill came through with a title that we could use. So we redrafted 1320 and hung it on to 2040. And I asked the chair of the Capital Budget Committee to prime sponsor that bill. And we got the bill steered away from the Business and Financial Institutions Committee and through the Capital Budget Committee instead. And so we got it passed out of the Capital Budget Committee. It made it onto the House floor calendar where it languished. Yeah, that's one of those little tricky maneuvers, right? But I thought it was pretty slick. Anyway, it languished on the House floor calendar, and it actually died at sine die, but it was not because of the bank piece. It was for a couple of issues attached to the original bill that we hung ours onto that really killed it. So, but that being said, there was so much momentum built up at that point. The House Speaker really supports this bill. And so he created the task force anyway, even though the bill had died. So that's where we're at right now, is going through that task force process. If you'd like to get on a stakeholder list for that task force, you can go to my legislative website and you can just click on a link and we'll get you on a stakeholder list and get you in the loop as this task force does its work. And the task force itself has its own separate website, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but call my office. We'll get you that information too, because then you can follow the progress of the task force directly as we're going through. So that's where we're at with the drafting of the bill for the next legislative session. A little bit of the thinking that went into this bill prior to drafting it, though. The real purpose is obvious. Let's keep our money in our state, working for our state. But the subtitles to those are, you know, jobs is, our House Democratic Caucus agrees that the #1 issue facing the people of the state is jobs. There's such insecurity out there, and the best thing that we can do this upcoming legislative session is try and figure out how are we going to create jobs. Well, you need money to be able to create jobs, especially from a government perspective. This bank is not going to be a panacea by any stretch. Oh, by the way, the bill is called the Washington Investment Trust. There's a little story behind that, because even though the Speaker supports this concept of the state bank, he says people really hate banks, but they also really hate the state. So right now, so when you put the two of them together, they're really going to hate this. So he said, come up with a different name. So we came up with this real warm and fuzzy name called the Washington Investment Trust. It is the state bank, though, rest assured. And for me, the #1 why, and I probably should have put it up there, but it's kind of an intangible thing. Why should we do this? If you look at the model of Bank of North Dakota, they're in their 92nd year or something like that, maybe 93rd year right now. And, you know, they took baby steps. But a century later, here they are, an institution that is literally floating North Dakota. And so, and I'll get into some of the things about North Dakota and what the bank has done for them. But my vision is that 25, 50 years down the road, 100 years down the road, we will have built an institution for our grandchildren, our grandchildren's children, that has amassed so much sufficient capital that we could actually survive recessions like what we're going through. It's like building, you know, when your child is born, you try your best to create a college fund, right, and do the right thing. This is what we're doing for our children down the road, is giving them the resources to really build a state that we all hope they have one day. So that's the number one reason. But getting on down to it, if you talk to any small business owner, aside from the need more customers issue, their number one issue is access to credit right now. 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I had a group of Mexican fruit growers from the Mexican Fruit Growers Association come into my office from Yakima. And they came in literally in tears because they said they were going to lose their farms. And the reason they were going to lose their farms was not because they were running a bad business or the fruit markets had fallen off. It was because the banks had cut off their credit. Nothing had changed in their credit rating or their credit history or their ability to produce. But to get to harvest, you've got to have a line of credit to get you through harvest. And they were cut off. So, you know, those kinds of things are just unconscionable. I'm going to show a little video about what North Dakota did, and Ellen alluded to it by declaring a moratorium on foreclosures and that sort of thing that North Dakota has done. But the bank can act as that heat sink for tough times. So, and it can absorb the hardship, whereas we as individuals can't do it. It's us collectively absorbing the hardship. Economic development, we can use it for that, our own state bank, but we have to be careful about that because when I went to the Bank of North Dakota to visit with their president and learn more about how they operate, his take-home piece of advice to me was, you have to make sure that bankers are running the bank, not economic development people, because economic development people have never seen a project they didn't want to fund. And you've got to make sure that the institution is solvent and following good, sound banking practices. So, because we're into it for the long term. So we will. That's one of the primary things about the bill that we're drafting. In my personal priorities is to make sure that it does follow sound banking principles and that it is insulated from political pressure from elected officials. It's got to be able to run as a sound business. But that being said, now the legislature can pass laws in North Dakota. What they do is they can target economic development initiatives. Say they wanted to develop their oil field. They can say, go that direction. Start targeting financing towards, and if they want to offer low interest loans to incentivize it, what they do is they pass an appropriation to subsidize that lower interest rate. But it is a very possible reality for our bank to do that. Work with and support commercial banking systems. So in following the North Dakota model and this task force, one of our primary things is to try and stay as close to the North Dakota model as possible, because what can you say bad about it? It's a proven product, a century's worth of testing, trials and tribulations as well. So, for instance, you take that farmer. If that farmer needed $5 million to get to harvest, most community banks have lending limits or capital limitations. Say they could only lend up to $2 million. Well, that community bank, who knows that, because they're a community bank, knows that farmer is good for that loan and will pay it back once they get to harvest. That community bank will reach out to the Bank of North Dakota and they go into what they call a participation loan. They participate and collectively, jointly, provide the $5 million of capital. So the Bank of North Dakota is giving out a loan at market rate. Bank of North Dakota is happy. The community bank is happy, not just because they completed the loan, but because they didn't have to go to their competitor to complete the loan and lose that customer. And the farmer's happy. Everybody's happy. It's a great system. That's the participation lending strategy that Bank of North Dakota follows, and that's one that we're going to try and emulate as well, hopefully down the road. What can you say about it? It's just smart government, smart use of taxpayers' dollars. So this is what they were able to build back there. Now they've gone through a couple of iterations of the Bank of North Dakota, but that's their president, Eric Hardemeyer, standing in the foreground. What I wanted to do at this point was show a little 4-minute video. Do I have time? Should I pass the video?
They actually saw it.
Oh, it was up. Okay, okay. Important pieces of the video file, though, were to show that, you know, North Dakota is obviously a very conservative state. But their governor, at the time, Governor John Hoeven, was recently elected U.S. Senator from the state of North Dakota. But he speaks very glowingly about what the Bank of North Dakota has been able to do for the state of North Dakota. The video clip also shows their Attorney General, who is also Republican, speaking very supportively of the Bank of North Dakota. The way the Bank of North Dakota is set up, their top governing body is this thing called the Industrial Commission. And it is 3 statewide elected. It's the governor, the Attorney General, and they have a statewide elected Commissioner of Agriculture. So those 3 are the top fiduciary for the Bank of North Dakota. Organizationally, below that, they have a governing board that's appointed or confirmed by the governor, and those are the financial experts who are making most of the business decisions on a day-to-day basis for the bank itself. The video also showed some of the innovative things that can, when you really start thinking out of the box about what a bank and what about having your own resource can do for your state. You know, absorbing the foreclosure debt or declaring a moratorium. The governor declared a moratorium on debt, foreclosures actually, when they had a crisis back in the day. There's a bunch of unique things about North Dakota. You may be all familiar with a lot of these, and Ellen covered some of them too. Lowest unemployment rate in the country, because, you know, we all rely on, we say that 75% of the new jobs that are created by small businesses. But if small businesses can't operate, there's no jobs created. North Dakota has figured out how to provide that access to credit that small businesses depend on to survive. It has one of the healthiest banking systems in the United States. Not only do they had no bank failures, and the reason they've had no bank failures is that the Bank of North Dakota, one of the things it does is act as a mini Federal Reserve to those banks. So when those banks need liquidity, their cash reserves get too low or for whatever reason, those banks go to the Bank of North Dakota, and the Bank of North Dakota keeps them afloat. So they've had no community bank failures. Meanwhile, here in Washington State, we've had 16 bank failures, I believe, since the credit crisis has started. And my understanding is that many of the ones that were on the bubble, we've had 25 on the bubble, I guess, up until recently, but the most recent word I've heard is that they're starting to come out of some of those problems, although I haven't heard that directly from Scott Jarvis, who's the director of the Department of Financial Institutions. But it also has the most decentralized bank system in the country. And by decentralized, I mean they have the most community banks per capita. So they don't have the monolithic Banks of Americas or Wells Fargo's that come in and suck up all the depositors. They have a whole bunch of community banks out there. And those are the banks that the Bank of North Dakota works with in partnership to make sure that the community banks who do know their local customers and can provide for the health of the community. I think that's an underrated recognition for North Dakota as the most decentralized bank system. They also were the only state in the country that actually had a budget surplus. The Bank of North Dakota has not only just returned money, about $500 million over the years, back to the North Dakota General Fund because it's a money-making operation, but North Dakota itself has a $1.1 billion surplus. For a small state like that, that's pretty phenomenal. A lot of people will say that's because of their oil and gas reserves. And it's true. They do have good oil and gas reserves. But that Bakken oil field also extends into Montana and Wyoming, and Montana and Wyoming still have the same budget problems as everybody else does. A lot of states have oil and gas reserves, yet they all seem to have budget problems. So when you total up all the different things that are unique about North Dakota, the one common factor is that they have their own bank. They have smart use of their taxpayers' money to keep their local economy going. Ellen's slide also talked about a lot of the other states that are doing stuff right now. She talked about California actually passing the bill through the legislature, which is pretty amazing. Hawaii also passed a bill out of the House of Representatives, but it died in the Senate. But you can see that this whole thing is starting to catch fire nationwide, and so much so that even President Obama had a proposal to create a national infrastructure bank in his jobs bill, which the Republicans refused to even hold a hearing on. What owning our own financial institution could do for Washington. We could fund our own capital projects, reduce or eliminate debt service appropriation, and create jobs. I mean, that about says it right there. But one thing that North Dakota does not have in their appropriations budget is a debt service line. Washington State, you know, we have a debt service line that is bumping on $2 billion in our biennial budget right now. So they finance their own there. They don't have to appropriate money to pay capital debt. That's not saying that it's not going away, but when you're paying it to yourself, you know, it kind of makes sense. It's small businesses, farms, okay, excuse me, with better access credit. You know all of this stuff, so I don't need to waste time on that, the benefits. The Center for State Innovation did a white paper study for us, a guy named Sam Munger who works back there. I think he's based out of Boston. But, and you can get that white paper off of the task force website. It's posted up there. There's also a white paper done by the Main Street Alliance, which is a project of Public Citizen, I believe, or no, Washington Citizen Action Network. And they did a study on the need for access to capital for small businesses. But this particular study by CSI, he loves his acronym, by the way, shows that whatever we create should be able to break even by year 3. So we would have to undergo a few years of getting the bank up and running. But that being said, by year 5, and he broke it down per 100 million of capital, initial capital startup, you can see the return going down to year 40, $743 million return off of a $100 million initial capitalization. So if we capitalize that bank with $1 billion instead of $100 million, that'd be $7.3 billion by year 40 that we could put into the capital base and leverage it back into the local economies to build our state. So, depending on how much we want to initially capitalize it is how much work it can do now. That's aside from the long-term goal of building this great institution that will act as a huge reserve for our grandchildren. So, what our task force is doing, I kind of went through most of this. What our priorities are, making sure that we're creating an institution that's not just going to be abused on the short term, but actually will be into it for the long term. And we've been having hearings. You can get, by going to our website, you can see when these hearings are. They're all open to the public too. So if you want to just come on down and watch or even participate, I welcome that. So I went back to North Dakota, as I mentioned, and while I was back there, and the interesting thing about Bank of North Dakota is, you know, when I talk with people on the street here say, when do I get to start putting my money into your bank, the state bank? And in North Dakota, their philosophy is the bank does belong to the people, so if the people want to put their money there, they should be allowed to, but they don't market it at all for that. Their prime depositor is the state of North Dakota. That being said, Bank of North Dakota does have one teller booth in Bismarck. So if you really feel like you need to bank with the state bank, you can go to Bismarck and deposit and get your money. But they don't have ATMs, they have none of the normal, credit cards, things that you would think of services that banks would provide. So when I was back there in North Dakota, it's in the state capital, so I went through their archives, which they have a wonderful museum, State North Dakota Museum. I really had a good time. If you want to go to have a good time and be surprised about how much fun you'd have, I guess you'd have to have, like banks kind of in a way too. But check out North Dakota's archive. They've got an amazing history about the nonpartisan league that Ellen talked about and how they came into power and some of the stuff that they did when they were in. And when they were actually trying to market to the people of North Dakota to get them to support creating their own Bank of North Dakota. And at the same time, they're also, as Ellen mentioned, the granaries were refusing to take their grain, so they wanted to build a granary too. They were using Seattle as a model for their campaign to convince North Dakotans that this is a good thing for them. So, title is obvious. What Seattle has done, America's best example of public ownership in successful operation. So in Seattle back in the day, and their article went through all of this, the farmers in our area were being strangled by the private shipping lines. They were charging through the nose so that the farmers felt like they had nothing to live on after they paid to get their stuff off the port. So they decided, let's create our own public port. What a concept, right? At the same time, you may recognize this. This is down there at Myrtle Edwards Park. The caption down, and this is from a 1919 newspaper called the Nonpartisan Leader, which is the official newspaper for the Nonpartisan League, which was the political party in power at that time. The caption says, probably the only publicly owned and operated grain elevator in the United States. So the moral of the story is we taught them how to do it right. Now they're teaching us how to do it right by showing us this banking model. So, thank you.